This is a fantastic recipe. It's called the No Knead Bread. It is simply 2 teaspoons of salt, 625 grams of flour. Doesn't matter what the flour, whether it's baker's flour, strong flour, hard flour, you can use any flour for this. It's half a teaspoon of dried yeast. That's about 2.5 grams. Okay, that all goes into a bowl, and then you're just going to mix it up. I like to use the end of a wooden spoon, so not the front end, and you'll see why soon, but the bottom of it. You're going to add into that 500 grams of cold water, or just normal water. You're going to mix that in, and what you should get is just bring it together and a sort of a big wet gluggy mixture. And really that's it. That's it simple. You don't need to overmix it. It will be gluggy, it'll be wet, it'll be very, very sticky, hence why we've only used the end of the spoon, not the other part. Now, the hardest part is leaving it to sit there for 20 hours. You can do it after 15 hours, but after 20 to 24 hours, you have this big bowl of bread. And at this stage, you're going to turn it out onto a floured tray. And it's going to be very, very sticky. So you need to be gentle with it. Don't try and get all the air out of it. You don't knock it back like you would with traditional breads. You are going to simply scoop it out. I like to use a scraper, whether it's a paint scraper or a spatula. A little bit of flour on it will help stop it sticking, and you just gently let it fall out. Okay, I always put flour on my utensil, whether using a little knife. I sieve flour on the top because I find that's much easier to work with rather than just putting the flour on it. A little bit of flour on top of your spatula, and then you can cut this into 2 logs. Again, what you're trying to do is not knock all the air out of it. Essentially, you haven't kneaded it, you haven't touched it. All you're doing is removing it from the bowl, placing it on a tray, stretch out the ends, put those into the middle, fold the 2 outside parts over into the middle, and then roll it on it so the seam is on the bottom side. Now this forms the shape. Stretch out the ends, put those into the middle, give it a little pat down, take the edge, fold it into the middle, take your second edge, fold it into the middle, and then just roll it over. So what you should now have is a nicely shaped baguette. Okay. So again, no kneading. It is a sticky dough. Make sure you get a little bit of flour on your hands. You can just push them into the shape that you want, and then you are all good to go. So it's going to need a second proof. Tea towel over the top will work. Much better than Glad wrap. Glad wrap will tend to stick. So a cotton tea towel over the top, you're going to leave it for about an hour to an hour and a half to do its final proof before it goes into the oven. So that's it. It's a very, very simple technique, very simple process, but it does look and feel a little bit strange because it is such a sticky dough. After an hour and a half or an hour, it won't have risen twice, but it will have retained back its shape. I like bread with a little bit more flour on top, and then you also want to cut or score the tops. Now what this does is when it's in the oven and it's starting to rise, it stops it from splitting or exploding. So it doesn't have to be a deep cut. These are very, very shallow. You can do any shape, size, style of cut you want, whether it's in a V shape, whether it's just a straight diagonal across. It doesn't make any difference. All you're trying to do is split the skin so that when it does start that rising in a hot oven, it will doesn't explode. Okay, so the hotter the oven, the better. A tray in the bottom with a little bit of water in it is fantastic because that's going to create steam. Goes in for approximately 20 minutes at 240 degrees Celsius. That's it. Don't have to do anything else. Now, if your oven's not a great oven, you might leave it in there a little bit longer, but what you're looking for is nice and brown. It should be sound hollow when it's cooked, and you can knock off any extra flour if you don't like that flour. I find that helps keep the bread also nice and fresh. You're going to leave it for at least 15 to 20 minutes, and then using a bread knife, you can slice through it, and you should have this quite moist, open crumb, which is this ideal bread. What's happened is, because you haven't kneaded it, because you haven't moved the gluten, it's actually done it itself. So the gluten has eaten all the natural sugars in the flours. It's holding, the strands are holding on to each other. You don't need to move those glutens because you're letting it do it over a very long, slow time. Traditionally, you might make bread, you might knead it for 10 minutes, but you'd only let it prove for an hour or 2 hours because it's got lots of yeast in it. So that's our no knead bread. Hope you've enjoyed that. Have fun.